Alright, how the hell is everyone? I'm doing pretty damn good myself. I'm gonna have to talk loud on this video because the last video I made, even though I haven't had my microphone in, the sound wasn't too good. So this is a work in progress. And I love it how people can go over my YouTube channel, my BitChute channel, and the videos on Facebook and see a progression. How I've really developed the technology over the years. So it's a work in progress, and hopefully, little by little, one apparatus at a time, I get closer to having the more professional presentation. And now that I am hopefully going to be going more mainstream with my podcast, in the sense of not the ideas, but the sense of the viewership, I'm hoping this is the case. I can afford to take some risks and to load stuff up, even if it's not perfect. But also, the main thing is I'm hoping that I'll be able to interact with other people, and other people will be able to interact with my ideas. I'll be able to flesh out more of this theory of history that I've been working on that places the hijacked narrative at the center. You know, one of the things about living in Ecuador is that it's very hard, if not impossible, to get the English books you want to read. There's plenty of English books. You can go to the English bookstore in Quito or Cuenca and buy used books, but and there's a teacher that so generously donated his library to the academy I used to work at. But it's not like I can go and order the latest book by David Icke or by Alana Freeland. And sometimes I'm embarrassed to have people on my show when I haven't read their book. Like in a couple of weeks, hopefully I'll be able to interview Aaron Good, who's written the book The American Exception. I'm going to have to get close because I want my sound to pick up. And I'm kind of embarrassed that I haven't read his book, you know. I still haven't read any books by Alana Freeland, and I've interviewed her a few times. Hopefully also going to be interviewing her in April. But I make up for not having read these people's books by listening and listening and listening and listening to their interviews. For example, Tom O'Neill, who wrote the book Chaos, came out in 2019 about Charles Manson, the CIA, and the 1960s. I probably now listen to every interview and podcast he's done over the last 5 years. So I feel I know the work pretty good. It's not a replacement for the book. It would be better if I could read the book, but living in Ecuador, that's just not possible. Speaking of which, I spent a couple of weeks just listening over and over again to the interviews that Tom O'Neill gave. And it's incredible, his research into MK Ultra and how they're really able to steer history by convincing the American public that the hippie movement was dangerous, and it had become dangerous because it had been infiltrated. And just the way they were able to see coming into the 60s, even as early as 1963, those that were really sovereign in our United States system of tyranny, they were able to see that the 60s were going to have a democratic and liberalization, democratization and liberalization. It could have been like the Arab Spring in the United States, 5 million man march on Washington just demanding change. And we actually saw some of this in the 1970s with the church committee, but there's always ways, and they use these programs like MK Ultra and the mind control to really to steer history. And it's funny because, you know, people in Ecuador, they say, you're talking about these zombie assassins and these mind control programs, you're not afraid they're going to come and get you? And it's very mainstream. You know, the Winter Soldier in Captain America Avengers. The Winter Soldier is the Manchurian Candidate, the zombie assassin, albeit a very exaggerated and very comic book, over the top example, but it's there. And it was based, as was the Bourne Identity movies, the whole saga. They were based on MK Ultra and the discoveries that congressional inquiries made about MK Ultra uh, in the 1970s. And when I think about how Cold War history was presented to me when I was growing up, my dad was something of a history buff, and he liked um, sitting us down and having us watch um, political documentaries and historical documentaries and movies. I'm glad that I had that, because a lot of people now, you talk to young people like my students, I see they don't know about World War II and Hitler and Nelson Mandela and Gandhi and these important reference points in the 20th century. And when I first got into 9/11 and the September 11th Truth Movement, people would say to me, "You really think our government would do something like that?" Well, our government has done stuff like that. And it's sad that most people don't know the history of false flag terrorism. But even going beyond what's admitted false flag terrorism, like Operation Gladio, if you look at events like the Oklahoma City bombing, watch documentaries like A Noble Lie about how Oklahoma City was also a false flag. You learn about the history of Latin America, the coups, the military dictatorships, the American imperialism. You realize that you grow up, you think you're on the good side of history, and you realize you're on the bad side of history, and we're not the good guys. And that really changed things for me. It really opened my eyes. And I get into conversations with people in Latin America that are right wing, and almost any kind of democratic movement they try to paint as Cuba, Cuba, Cuba. And I know where this caricature comes from. Actually, I've had firsthand experience with two Maoist movements, a violent Maoist movement. One in Peru. Of course, it had ended by the turn of the century. It was something that was in the late 90s. But I mean, my experience, people talked to me about it. It was stay up late in the night hearing stories about the Civil War against this terrorist Maoist movement that wanted to literally overthrow the state, and they would show up in towns and say convert or die, and it was horrible. They walk around with a red flag with a communist symbol. But also the FARC in Colombia. I stayed in Colombia for a short time, and I've heard stories about the FARC, and that also the Maoist organization. But the problem is too, in Colombia, they push the politics underground. Political parties in Colombia got the Guatemalan treatment, and so it pushed the socialist movement away from the parliamentary system and into the jungle. And I'm afraid that's what's happened in most of the Latin American countries, even though the term Marxist rebels conjures up images of Cuba or these Maoist rebellions I mentioned. But most of the time, in Central America and Chile and Argentina and Brazil, Uruguay, these so-called Marxist rebels were really actually just those that wanted democratic norms for their country. And in the United States, we put great value on citizen participation in civic and public interest organizations. But in Latin America, all that was demonized as communist subversive, off with their heads. But my theory of the history that is emerging is really based on looking at these pseudo events like 9/11 and like COVID-19, like AIDS, these events that come and take the world by storm, but that aren't based on anything. And it has required me to do a lot of different areas of research, not only history, but also science and medicine. And hardly anybody I know takes such a holistic and such an interdisciplinary approach. For example, Aaron Good, who has the American Exception podcast, he looks at JFK assassination, 9/11, CIA drug dealing, Iran-Contra, but he doesn't incorporate AIDS and COVID into his analysis, which I do. So I'm asking, to what extent can we really say that the reality around us has been hijacked and been manipulated? And then what are the moral, ethical, and legal implications and recourses that us citizens have? And are there revolutionary implications? How do we best deal with getting this message out in the marketplace of ideas? Which is, I guess, why we're doing these shows.